Hello and welcome back to the What the Falk Sunderland preview podcast ahead of our opening home game of the season against Sheffield Wednesday. It wasn't that long ago that both sides were scrapping for a playoff berth in League One, but as we approach the weekend game, both teams will hope they can sort of put their clubs back at least on the road to potential promotion to the Premier League this season, all being well. And to be honest, things have changed a lot over the past year with Sheffield Wednesday themselves. So we've roped in Matt from the Wednesday Till I Die podcast, our second debutant of the season. Worrying, really. I'm starting to worry that people don't want to come back, but how are you, mate? You okay?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, Graham. I'm much better after Sunday, put it that way. But it all going so far at Sheffield Wednesdays this season, pretty much as we'd planned. So yeah, nothing to grumble. We were saying just before coming on, weren't we, that it's a really strange one because both sets of fans are happy. And for the two clubs, that's really, really rare at this point in time.
I don't think it's ever happened. But people are wondering, because James is normally on from exactly the same podcast. He's not dead. Don't worry. James is fully alive, just to clarify. Is that correct?
Yes, he's on holiday this week. So you've got your substitute teacher filling in today.
God, thank God. Don't tell James. Plenty to get stuck into, but I think obviously only one place to start. 4-0 win over Plymouth. I watched the game, opening day of the season. Look, anyone would take that. You're currently top of the league. I think I know the answer to this, but how was the performance?
Yeah, we were outstanding on the day. Plymouth were appalling. Obviously, I think as most people who watched the game would also agree. So it was really interesting, kind of like obviously once the initial hype and euphoria has kind of worn off a little bit, it's really given us no standing of kind of like how good a side we're actually going to be this year because of the opposition who we were playing. Like, I know obviously everybody kind of says after about 10 games in a season, it sort of settles in and you can kind of get a bit of a rhythm of kind of where we're going to be. After we play yourselves, we've also got Leeds, and those are two real benchmark tests early doors for, I suppose, how good we actually are going to be this year. Plymouth, I will be surprised if we actually have a better performance than that all season. Every single thing that we tried worked. The interchange between, I suppose, midfield we had plenty of new faces on Sunday. The attack as well worked. The defence were rock solid. James Beadle, obviously back in goal, had very little to do, but what he did very well. Yeah, really, really strange feeling. Best opening day we've had since mid-1930s, I think, as well, in terms of an opening day win. So, yeah, you won't hear me grumbling much today, I'll be honest with you.
No, of course. I think I was like looking back at last season, and I remember the two podcasts I did with James last year was so contrasting because of obvious reasons, and Sunderland fans and Sheffield fans will know why. And I thought, I'm sure when I spoke to James last time in the first preview show, they hadn't won in like 10 games. So I looked at it. It was 14, I think, about 14 games until you registered a win. So look, I'll openly admit, and I think a lot of Sunderland fans will as well, and maybe even Sheffield fans, you were one of the worst sides I've ever seen in my life in the 3-0 win at Hillsborough. So just how different is the feeling around the club this year in comparison to last? Because you've got a manager that you know what he's going to give you. You like him. And you've got a win in your first game that was by 4 goals, and it's not going to take you 14 games to get one.
Yeah, it was night and day. From obviously when you spoke to James, I actually thought that yourselves was the most complete performance that we saw at Hillsborough from an away side last year, that 3-0. I thought, you'd blown us away in the first 12 minutes. So I live in Birmingham, so I'd driven 2 hours up for the game, and inside 12 minutes, you're 2-0 down, and you kind of sat there thinking, do I just go home now? Because this ain't going to get any better, is it? But yeah, you were absolutely outstanding. Obviously, the reverse fixture, you saw the marked change. And the two games are really an example of kind of like how optimistic we feel as a fan base. It's really strange saying that for a side that finished 20th last year. This is the most optimistic most Wednesday fans have ever been going into a season, especially definitely in my lifetime. It is solely down to the manager and his coaching staff. He was interviewed for the job in the summer, so last summer, didn't get it, and it went to Cisco Munoz. That obviously lasted 13 games. We didn't register a win. Registered, I think it was 1 or 2 draws. Can't remember. I try to forget. And then from then, up until January, you could see him trying and attempting to implement a style, but the squad was, I think, so lacking in confidence and so beaten down by another manager's way of working. And Danny Rohl has a specific way of playing The January window massively helped us. He brought in a couple of signings, most notably Ian Poveda, obviously, who's gone to yourselves, Ike Ugbo, James Beadle. They were catalysts in turning our season around. All three of them had a huge monumental impact on kind of the way we played. Alongside that, Danny continued to add to his coaching staff over the course of the back end of the season. And what we saw actually towards the end of it is we were peaking at the right time in that relegation zone, because it did feel from February onwards, no matter how many games we won, everybody around us would always win, and we had so many points to catch up. Where actually, when we got out the relegation zone on the last day at Blackburn, I haven't seen a release of emotion. I was going to say I haven't seen a release of emotion like that ever, but it was only 12 months before when we were all playing Peterborough in the playoffs. But it was a completely different feeling. Heading into the summer, the worry was obviously initially about keeping Danny Rohl, who was obviously linked with yourselves. I mean, I was up at the Stadium of Light on that last day of the season. I'll be there on Sunday, and watching sort of everybody making very fluttering and batting eyelashes at him as he was walking off the pitch was worrying to Wednesday fans. We tied him down to a longer term deal as quickly as possible. And honestly, that's the best piece of business that we did all window. After that, went and got signings in really quickly, started to take shape of the squad. And most importantly, the chairman has kept his mouth shut, because as everybody knows, our chairman is an absolute basket case in regards to poorly timed statements, really poor decision making from the top down, and the whole and sole reason as to why we feel so optimistic at this point in time is down to the manager and his coaching staff, and then ultimately the players who have bought into it as well. There is a real good factor around the club at the minute, but I will preface that by saying it's going to take one unpaid tax bill, one poorly timed statement, something where he's blaming the fans for not paying enough money, even though we've got the highest ticket prices in the league, for it all to come tumbling back down again to earth. But I do think that the fans and fan bases up and down the country, either when they're coming to visit Hillsborough or when they're seeing us away, you will see a fan base who is 100% behind the manager at the minute. And that's why we're so optimistic.
It's funny you mentioned about the contrast in fans and stuff like that, and feeling positive and not feeling positive. I was actually on a flight to Tuscany, as it was at the time, just like humble brag there. And we had like about a 10-minute delay before we took off. So, you know, this tell you to turn your Wi-Fi and your phone off. And I was like, nah, Sunderland are playing literally as we kick off. I'm leaving this on as much as I can. Couldn't get a signal to watch the game, but I could still get WhatsApp messages. So my fiancée was texting me the score, and she went, 1-0. And I was like, oh, brilliant. That's a good way to start off. And just as kind of we were considering going on to the runway and kind of taking off, the second one went in, and I thought, and she texted me saying, Sheffield fans are already leaving, to which was quite funny from our perspective. Yeah. And yet I went down for the Sheffield Wednesday game at home, and there was loads of Sheffield fans, like all up and down the concourse on the Metro, going, you know, from Newcastle, going from Sunderland, going to the game, like fully enjoying themselves and expecting a win. I mean, Sunderland fans did as well. We played poorly, but you were expecting a win. And for someone who doesn't really watch Sheffield at all, the contrast between the two of them was just like, it's the same sort of players. I don't really understand it. It is all down to Danny Rohl. Like you can tell that. And his coaching staff, of course. There's a reason that, you know, Sunderland and other clubs were linked to him as well. But not every good manager always works at a football club. So why has the marriage of Danny Rohl and Sheffield been so well aligned?
I think because, I mean, first and foremost, the players all bought into it. Every single player who is at our club has stated, whether they be either signing for the club this summer or in the January window, or whether they were re-signing contracts. Loads of them have said this is the best coach that we've ever worked with. His methods, his ideas, his philosophy, the way in which that he is clear in terms of his instructions for players is second to none. And, you know, this being his first job in management, many of them said that they feel he will go, you know, right, without wanting to borrow a well-worn phrase in the EFL, right to the very top. I think after that, the fan base were in such a hole after Xisco left, and after all of the good work that the previous manager before Xisco, Darren Moore, had done in terms of reuniting a fan base and connecting it with a club, that was all torn down in the space of a summer window. Danny came in, and it was clear so his first game was away at Watford. We lost the game 1-0. It was one of the hottest tickets that I think Wednesday fans tried to get last year. inside of the first 10, 15 minutes, you could see there was a plan. You could see there was an identity. You could see what the players were doing. And like every football fan, I mean, yourselves as well. I mean, Sheffield Wednesday and Sunderland fans, I always like to think have a bit of an affinity for one another because they've been through so much kind of like together and they know exactly what it's like. And it's been at a similar-ish time.
We've been shit for ages. And then sometimes we have inklings have been quite good, but mainly we're pretty shit at most of the time. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely the same. I feel your pain. But I think watching a manager of his caliber come in, I think every single Sheffield Wednesday fan is still scratching his head as to why on earth that's happened. I think the connection between that coaching staff, the players obviously is the most important one, but then the fan base as well, because even players who you would argue potentially don't have the quality or earlier on in the season playing in a system where it was very clear that players had no idea what they were supposed to be doing, no idea what their jobs were. Paul Valentin, for argument's sake, who you may or may not see on Sunday, went from a player who we were all scratching our heads at going, I can't understand what this kid does, to all of a sudden being, like a bit of a cult hero and a fan's favourite kind of towards the back end of last season. I think it's just that knitting of everything together. And also when he speaks as well, Danny, to media or to fans, it's exactly the same consistent message all the time. He doesn't put any shit down in terms of if he says we've been bad, he just says, yeah, no, the game plan hasn't worked today. He doesn't try and pin it on players. He doesn't try and pin it on anybody else. He says, first and foremost, it's down to me. I'm the one who makes the decisions. I suppose he just does it in a way that fans are reacting positively to, because also back into last season, we did receive some absolute pastings, 4-0 away at Huddersfield, 6-0 away at Ipswich. It wasn't all plain sailing and smooth sailing, but constantly coming out and being very, very honest and open about where the club is at this point in time, I think has earned him a lot of goodwill. And he's got, a long, long leash at Wednesday at the minute.
We'll get onto Ugbo because obviously that's a conversation point, but I wanted to chat about, as you said, Ian Poveda. I've called him Ian. I prefer the Ian. What can I say? He hasn't played for us yet. We don't know much about him. It kind of came out of the blue, really. And one thing that probably made me feel like he might be a good signing was the amount of Sheffield Wednesday fans that were trying to convince themselves that he's just injury prone. No, I didn't need him anyway. Didn't need him. Some Sheffield Wednesday fans came out and said, look, it's disappointing. Let's not deny it. He's at Sunderland now. We have good wingers in Patrick Robertson, Jack Clark, arguably the best in the league, in my opinion. But what can Poveda bring? And why were Sheffield Wednesday fans admittedly quite disappointed he didn't join?
I mean, you are speaking to the right person if you are looking for a Ian Poveda fan.
Yes.
Yeah, I suppose I would say if he was slightly less injury prone and had pace, he would be playing mid-table Premier League football comfortably. He is a box of tricks, draws bags of players every single time he has the ball, but somehow manages to escape, consistently makes the right decisions, creates so much for the team, and is not selfish in the way that some wingers can be in terms of they try to do too much. He always at us from January for the 8-9 games that he was available, he consistently made the right decisions all the time. What he did for us last season was he freed up people like Barry Bannon, because at the start of last season, it was effectively, if you stop Barry Bannon, you stop any of our creativity, which it has been for a number of years at Wednesday. What he was able to do is give us another outlet, a consistent attacking outlet, where in games of, I think back in particular to the Rotherham game where we played away, and it was a nailed on 6-pointer, two teams scrapping away at the bottom. He was on the pitch for 60 minutes and they went from doubling him to tripling him because he was that much of a threat, and still managed to create opportunities, still managed to create and find space. I think as a Sunderland fan, I would be very, very excited by the signing, but also prefacing that with the fact of, I agree with you, I think you have definitely the best winger in the division in Jack Clark. Patrick Roberts obviously had a slow season last year and it didn't hit the heights, but as Wednesday fans, we are all more than aware of what Patrick Roberts can do, both at yourselves and also he scored the goal for Derby that relegated us as well. So yeah, I would suggest he would probably be a squad rotation player with a view to coming in and making an impact if one of those was to move on in the next 12, 18, 24 months or so. But again, with him, I think a lot of the Sheffield Wednesday fans, as you've rightly alluded to, immediately become, well, we barely saw any of him. He'd only play 60 minutes. He's not that. I think anybody who says that is absolutely kidding themselves. He was a player who you would go and watch a game, and you would go and watch it because you enjoyed watching him play football. It wasn't because of his output or anything like that. Is you would go and he would, anytime he received the ball, it was, to borrow that old Chris Waddle adage, you would hear like the clack of the seats raise up because you knew he was going to do something. I was gutted to see him go. It took me 5 working days to get over it, I'll be honest with you. I think, I don't know this, but I think he has some connection with one of your backroom staff through Man City, which seemed to be the deciding factor, potentially alongside where the club is as well, also in terms of established in the division and potentially where you could go as to where we are this season.
Another player that was announced horrendously, it's probably the first bad thing Danny Rohl has done at Sheffield, and made me kind of go, please, we didn't sign him now. I'm lying. We do need a striker, but I didn't know much about him. Obviously, I'm talking about Ugbo. He is a player that evidently had an affinity with Sheffield. I think we were kind of hopeful that we could maybe entice him in, because I think personally we need 2 strikers because we don't really have one senior one at the moment. What is it that Sheffield have got in Ugbo, and what is it that Sunderland have missed out on? Because it's quite obvious he's going to score this Sunday, regardless of the result, isn't it?
I think if you're looking for as long as his international clearance comes through, I think you're looking at a nailed on first goal scorer there.
Oh, absolutely.
He is. I always thought when you guys had Ross Stewart playing for you, he was such a handful, a real handful in terms of worked very hard. What for the size of him, he wasn't particularly slow, knew where the back of the net was. That effectively is what Ike Ugbo is, and did for us. I think we're so heavily reliant on a character like Michael Smith, who actually is, I would describe as a poor man's Ike Ugbo, in terms of he works incredibly hard, closes down everything, but it just takes him a bit longer to get there. Is okay in the air, does score a lot of goals at League One, but just couldn't do it in the Championship. Ike Ugbo came to us in January, and I think the manager got the best out of him because he understood how to play him. I think playing in a front 3 where one of those is a close friend of him in Anthony Masaba, and they'd worked together previously at I think it was a Belgian club before. He is, according to all of the data, he gets better with better players, which is why I'm extremely pleased he didn't sign for yourselves, because I think had he signed for you, and I'm really not meaning to twist the knife in here, you'd have probably been looking at a 20-goal-a-season striker in the Championship. He effectively, when a chance falls to him in the box, he is never shy in taking a shot. And it did take him a little while to get up and running at Wednesday. I think he went 3 games without a goal. In those 3 games, I think he hit the post twice, the bar once, one off the line. And then when he scored, he couldn't stop scoring for a spell. I think he went 6 in 6 or 7 in 7 for us. It slowed towards the end of the year, but he is just he's a penalty box predator, but also has the ability to initiate a press if that would be what you were looking for him to do, which is why I think it works so well for us, is because he's an intelligent footballer who understands his role with an eye for goal, really. Again, I think it's a really, really smart piece of business, which is so unlike Sheffield Wednesday, because years gone by, we would have seen him for 6 months, everybody desperate to get him. And then, of course, he goes to Sunderland. And, of course, he scores 20. But, yeah, very, very bit of a handful. Jamal Lowe, who we've obviously brought in, I know people will be more familiar with him from his time at Swansea. He played in the striking role on Sunday just gone. I'd be very surprised if he loses his place, because he's played all pre-season for us. He's looked sharp. He looked sharp on Sunday. Ugbo's not had any game time. He's just been training with the City group. So yeah, if you do see him on Sunday, yeah, I would expect him to score, just because that is absolutely nailed on, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. And it also, I think every Sunderland fan would have been really happy with everything said about Poveda, got really pleased. And suddenly you become the best preview opposition person I've ever had, and then suddenly everyone hates you because you compared him to Ross Stewart and said how good this lad was. I was kind of, if I could have pinpointed the one thing for you not to say to me, to not make me feel bad, it would have been, don't compare him to Ross Stewart, and you did it in the first line. It's a sore point for me. I'm a big Ross Stewart fan.
I don't want to say amazed, because obviously Southampton were throwing a lot of money around, obviously, at the start of last year. But I think that Sunderland were my main worry for the club that he would go to at the end of the window when his loan finished. I think it has helped that he has an affinity with Sheffield Wednesday and that we have got a lot out of him. But if he hadn't have come to us, I think, honestly, it would have been an ideal home for him. So, yeah, I am thrilled he's signed for us.
You talked about that batshit owner. Chancery is literally like a sentence or a statement away from just destroying Sheffield Wednesday, which means everything we've just discussed previously could literally drop you in the shit regardless.
Yeah.
And I thought, you said he'd been quiet, and I thought he has been quiet, actually, to be fair, when I was researching stuff. And then I found something 3 days ago, and I was like, aha, your fans are going to get kicked out or asked to leave the stadium if they're wearing a fake shirt. Was he just bored? Is that the next thing? Or
I think so. It's something that has been quite rife on Sheffield Wednesday social media in terms of it's become a bit of a up the DHgate owls because the shirt prices that we are paying is currently the highest in the division.
I mean, just shirts in general. Like, I mean, the Euros. Look, I know it's a different point, but £85 for not even the proper England shirt.
Yeah,
and without kind of going down on a political route of a podcast here, there's a cost of living crisis and things are costing more money. My wages have not gone up, if anyone's listening. To penalise fans for simply not being able to afford a shirt or wanting to represent it, again, it just smacks in the face of Chancery, the club not understanding what Sheffield Wednesday are all about.
Yeah, I agree with you. Myself and James were discussing it on Sunday, basically saying I can't work out whether this is a thing from the club and the club have just put it out, or whether it's a combined thing between Macron and the club. I think, again, when you look through the statement, the statement is so poorly worded because, honestly, who is going to throw somebody out for wearing that type of a shirt? But I think it's that animosity, which is, it will never be rebuilt with our current chairman in charge. Now, you mentioned him. He bought the club for his son when he was 10, 11 years old. His son is now turning 18, 19, about to go through business school in America.
Better than a PlayStation, isn't it?
100%, yeah.
Here's Chef Wed.
Yeah, pretty much. And you can see down the line exactly where this is going in terms of it being passed over to his son. There does feel with our current chairman that he feels that the fans get on his back for everything. The fans feel that we're vilified for absolutely everything that goes wrong with the football club. It's just a total impasse at the minute. And any statement, even if that had come out as a joint statement between Macron and Sheffield Wednesday, and it had been done in a partnership, and it said both would like to remind supporters about the importance of buying official license club merchandise, and here's where the proceeds go to, and here's what it's going to do for you. Please continue to do it, or of course do the sensible thing and don't say a damn thing. Like, that would have been the normal thing to do. But again, it's been a while since he's had something, and that was fairly mild in terms of what we've had of a statement in the past 12 months. So I think everybody was just on such a good feeling, they took one look at it, put the phone straight back in the pocket and went, nah, fuck that.
I think there was a period of time where I was like, obviously we were both going for the playoffs, and there was the feeling around that second playoff game that we were going to go to Fortress Hillsborough and we were going to get beat. Lo and behold, it didn't happen. And it reminded me of Portsmouth for a little bit, and Portsmouth really got on my nerves. And I started going, oh, Chef Wedder getting on my nerves. And then I seen the statements from Chancery, and I was like, oh God, no, I actually feel really desperately sorry for them, because this is objectively funny, but really not that funny if you're a fan of any football club. Yeah. It read like, I can't even think of a good analogy. Like, no one had proofread that.
Yeah.
Any of the statements.
Agreed. No, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you, Greg. I think the other thing that he does as well is he had a habit 12 months ago of directly responding to fans via email. So he had openly released you could find his email address on the club website. So of course fans were emailing him in. Some of them were, I will say, some of them were absolutely vile, and they were, wishing kind of all sorts of ill on not only him, but his family. And his family has come in for some horrendous stick on social media, which is not one person condones that. He was, however, responding directly to emails, basically saying, who are you to tell me anything? Why do you feel you have a right to do this? Even though he was the one who had asked people to do so. I don't know whether James mentioned this last time he was on. He was actually invited to a conversation with the chairman, with a group of fans last year that went for 3.5, 4 hours, and it was effectively one question asked, and our chairman just spoke at fans and basically blamed them for all of the ills and ailments. So I think, again, it won't take much for you to see yellow placards, tennis balls, mass protests again at Hillsborough. But I think the most sad thing about the saddest thing about it all is it's completely divided the fan base on the issue of ownership, because there is a camp of people who firmly believe that, well, he is putting money into it, he is keeping us afloat. It is what it is. Like, get over it. You shouldn't be doing this, and the way in which that you're going about it is wrong. Some are saying, well, he is stumping up cash, and he is, he has invested in the club previously, but we're going back 6 years ago here. There are another, I would say a majority of fans who feel we deserve better. It feels like it's a bit like with the Ugbo signing. That's the first transfer fee that we've paid over like £1 million for 6-7 years for a player. And when you're talking a club that has aspirations to be a top-end championship team, it's peanuts. We are very much living hand to mouth at the minute, and until the owner is out of here, that is, in my opinion, where we will continue to be.
Yeah, for me, I think it's thrown about a lot, isn't it, that a chairman is a custodian, and I think a custodian means a lot more than an owner, if that makes sense. Simply putting the money in. You signed up for that, dickhead. That's just the way it's going to be. Yeah. I disagree with almost everything Alan Sugar says, but the one thing I do agree with is if you want to make money, don't buy a football club. And that was 100%. Said in the 90s. So if you're losing money, well, welcome to football, dickhead.
Absolutely correct.
On to my favourite topic in the whole world, really, Sunderland. We started really well. The first top flight win, first opening day win in the top two divisions for us since 2009. A 1-0 win at Bolton Wanderers when Darren Bent scored on his debut, which tells you how long ago that was.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we started well. There's certain things we need. I think the striker thing's been touched on. Ultimately, we do need 1, 2, 3 if I was being incredibly greedy. Haven't got them as yet, but positive start. Still got a lot of good players within that team. I know we don't watch this every week, but what have you made of Sunderland over the past, should we say, year? Because there's been a few different managers we've had.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's been, from, again, outside looking in, it appears that midway through last season, I mean, the appointment of Michael Beale just seems it was like, ultimately, he must have interviewed either incredibly well or lied. Like, it's one of the two.
I don't want to get in trouble, but I get the feeling, in my personal opinion, it could have been a combination of two, because we had a QPR fan on that said, as soon as he gets the PowerPoint out, you're fucked.
Yeah.
And we were fucked for about 12 weeks, all because of a bloody well PowerPoint.
And that was it, yeah. And that was it, is because obviously you'd been relatively successful under Alex Neil in terms of getting yourselves out of League One. Tony Mowbray come in, and Tony Mowbray is one of my sort of like darlings of like the EFL in terms of he's an old school manager who has no problem in adapting his way to suit more modern football. And that was a really, really smart appointment. You almost arrived at the playoffs like way ahead of schedule against Luton. And I think definitely the game at Kenilworth Road, I mean, it was so one-sided from your perspective, just felt like it was just never going to happen on the day. Then obviously going into the next season, I was thinking, okay, they'll be exactly there or thereabouts again. It's an incredibly exciting, very young, very talented squad, a who's who of really EFL young talent. Appointment of Michael Beale happened. And then after that, it felt just as if kind of like you were treading water from then on. The thing that I suppose worried me from a Sunderland well-being perspective was it was the lack of fight or wins that appeared to be coming in the back end of the season. And I know that, you lost a really key component in that front three in terms of Ross Stewart, and there were players missing. But I was looking at the squad, even when we played yourselves on the last day, that squad should be nowhere near where we are, like absolutely nowhere near where we are. And the size of how good the job was the year before, to have fallen to where they did at the back end of last year, it was obviously really good from our perspective, because it did feel like, we all looked at that last game at Sunderland thinking, oh, please don't go into something needing this. And then obviously as it transpired, actually travelling up to the game everybody was thinking, "Oh no, I'm really pleased we're playing Sunderland because they are on a horrendous run." And I didn't think particularly on the day you were a bad side. I just thought that actually there wasn't that cutting or clinical edge, and it felt like a little bit like the fight had gone out of the players because they knew they were playing for nothing. Since obviously making the managerial appointment of Labrie, it's been. I suppose I don't have a clue what to really expect on Sunday because looking at obviously I didn't watch the game on the weekend, but looking at the stats, I wouldn't have thought Sunderland are a side that are happy to sacrifice all of the ball, or not all of the ball, but the majority of the ball and play on the counter. I know you do have two wingers who potentially that maybe suits a little bit better. But I thought this is a side that will be there or thereabouts, towards the top end of the division come the end of the season. It is, I mean, you've arguably got, Patterson in goal, Trey Hume, Jack Clark we've mentioned. There is a real wealth of young talent in that squad. It feels outside looking in like this is pretty much the season where it needs to happen or there or thereabouts. And I thought it was an interesting managerial appointment just because of he wasn't a well-known, like a Will Still name type of thing.
He kind of just came out of nowhere after 120 days. But it's funny, kind of looking at it last week, I looked at the stats and thought, that's not how I recalled it. I think last week, in the same way that Sheffield Wednesday's performance was borderline perfect, so was ours. But that's not going to be like that for the rest of the season. That's just not how the championship works. But I think we had a lot of, when we had possession, we used it well, which was probably a big thing. I think there was times when we had a lot of possession last season where, we just missed loads of chances and went, we need a striker. We're still saying that for the record at the time of recording on Tuesday. But it's essentially, there's definitely a different style that's coming in play. And I think, one game, impressive so far. I think the next two games, which are obviously Sheffield Wednesday and Burnley at home, will be really good markers. If you were to pick out one player for Sunderland, and I know we've touched on a few, but one player that you could take for Sheffield, this is going to be a new segment to everyone, in case anyone's wondering, just so everyone can talk about Jack Clark. Who would it be, and why?
I honestly wouldn't swap the goalkeeper. I think he is the best goalkeeper in the division, but I wouldn't swap the goalkeeper that we've got. But the difference being that is James Beadle is only on loan for a year. I think I would be looking at where we currently are probably missing players, which is central midfield. So I would be looking at taking, the one who everybody is speaking about in terms of Joe Bellingham because of his brother. I would be looking at taking him into Sheffield Wednesday with an idea of him developing and eventually taking over the role of Bannon in that central midfield, just because I think of the age profile of the hype and the quality surrounding him. Whether he go, it's unlikely that he'll go on to reach the heights of his brother, but he's certainly a more than competent and more than capable championship central midfielder who can create and pull strings. I thought he was exceptional when we played at Hillsborough last year. And, I know he slowed towards the end of the season, but I think that was probably just a marker of kind of like the club as a whole. So I would probably take him, yeah.
I like his brother a lot because he's really good for England, for one, and two, he seems to be the biggest Sunderland fan on the planet at the minute, which is just bloody brilliant as far as I'm concerned. It's like the new Zinedine Zidane. Really likes the lads. Fantastic. Before I let you go, obviously I'm going to be on your podcast as well, as I normally am with Wednesday Till I Die. But one more question. Prediction for the game, first and foremost, and where do you think Sunderland's end position will be?
1-1, I think, will be the score on Sunday. I think it'll be two sides who are similarly matched with, by the look of it, very different styles. Where I think you'll finish, I'm assuming you're not going to lose anybody, is my honest answer.
I hope not.
And that's my worry. I think I'm going to have you just outside the playoffs, finishing 8th, just with the idea of if one or two of those key important players goes, I think it could be a little while in a period of adjustment.
Yeah, I said 8th actually, with a similar mindset. But as always, thanks for joining. I was going to say as always, but you're not James, obviously. New James, thanks for joining me, mate. I'll be on your podcast. Before I let you go, where can we find your stuff in case anyone wants to listen to how I represent Sunderland, which I probably wouldn't recommend, but just in case you're, a glutton for punishment, where can we find it?
Absolutely. So our main social media platform is at WTID Pod, and my own one is Matt John 89.
Perfect, mate. Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Take care.